The oceans of the world are huge and expansive places, and across many of them they are in many ways ecological deserts, and also covering over 40% of the Earth's surface. This mostly comes down to subtropical gyres, which with their swirling expanse of nutrient-starved seawater means that the growth of many key organisms like phytoplankton and zooplankton is compromised, which has further implications for large marine life, including sharks. Still though, many animals still frequent these regions, and one of the most interesting and in many ways wacky of them all are a group of sharks, being the group I'll be talking about today, being the thresher sharks. There are 3 currently known species of them, with some being more well known than others, but are all very fascinating and very cool in their own ways. To begin, they are a wide-ranging group, being found across all temperate and tropical oceans, with the most often being encounters near the surface, though as will be discussed later on with one particular species, are also known to frequent depths of up to 700 meters down. They prefer warm temperatures of around 16 and 21 degrees, though can sometimes be found occurring in waters as cool as 9 degrees, and sometimes even lower if they're travelling to greater depths. They belong to the order of Lamniformes, which also encompasses other sharks like the great white and mako species, as well as more unique animals like the megamouth and basking sharks. The 3 thresher species sit in the genus of Alopeas, comprising of the pelagic thresher A. pelagicus, the bigeye thresher A. superciliosus, and the common thresher A. vulpinus. They get the genus and family name of Alopidae from the Greek word of alopex, which means fox, which tracks in the case of the term for vulpinus for the common thresher's species name, which is in reference to their massive tails. They also got this term in reference to their perceived cleverness, which was documented by fishermen and written about by Aristotle, that they would cut fishing lines above the hook to escape capture, as well as that they'd also apparently protect their young by keeping them in their mouths, something which must have been an erroneous account. Eventually, the name of thresher came into more popularity by around the mid-19th century, though they were still quite poorly known in many ways until recently. There is also likely to be a 4th member that is yet to be described that turned up in an allozyme analysis back in 1995, with them being known from the eastern Pacific off of Baja California, being previously identified as a bigeye thresher. They are, however, only known from the muscle samples from one specimen, and no studies have yet been conducted on their morphology and how they might differ from the other 3, much more well-known sharks. Getting started with the individual species, the aptly named common thresher is also the largest of the 3, getting to average lengths at adulthood of about 5 meters and weighing up to 230 kilograms, with them also being highly migratory, moving up to higher latitude waters to keep up with warm water masses as they move. In spite of how mobile they are though, analysis of the mitochondrial DNA of 3 populations has shown that they differ a pretty good amount, which suggests that all these populations rarely, if at all, interbreed, something which gives just the right conditions for a potential speciation event down the line evolutionarily. Appearance-wise, they're the largest of all the thresher sharks, some being up to 6 meters in length and up to half of that being their exceptionally long upper tail lobe, which will be discussed more in detail later. Their eyes out of the 3 are also proportionally the smallest, having more of a rounded and short snout as well. They are often misidentified as their relative, the pelagic thresher, due to how similar they can look at face value, though they do have some differences to look out for. The main difference is that their white underbelly extends up over the base of their pectoral fins, isolating them from the rest of their broader upper body colour, also having labial furrows on the edge of their mouths which the pelagic species lacks. They also have more compact bodies, with their pectoral and pelvic fins also being closer together as well. When it comes to their relation to the other thresher sharks, it turns out that they're the most basal of their clades, with their closest relative being the potential undescribed thresher species mentioned earlier in the video. While underwater, they do just seem to have the typical bluish grey and white coloration of many other sharks, but at the surface, they actually appear quite differently. Out of water, they can be a striking metallic purple through the brown on their heads and dorsal region, and also more of a teal down their flanks and tail. Female sharks give birth to about 4 pups at a time after a gestation of around 9 months, with the pups, upon being born, already being about 130 centimeters long and weighing about 5 or 6 kilograms. They are known to commonly live to about 15 years in age, and some older individuals can get well into their 40s through 50s. Being such fast and powerful swimmers, it also tracks that they possess some handy physiological adaptations that allow them to maintain such active lifestyles, and that is indeed the case. This comes mainly in the form of the rete mirabile, Latin for wonderful net, which is a strong countercurrent exchange system that helps them to both generate and retain their own body heat. This system allows them to keep their body temperature a good 2 degrees higher than that of the ambient seawater that they find themselves in, Though, interestingly enough, they lack this system around their eyes, which does make it harder for them to protect their brains from temperature changes. This feature is likely due to them taking less extreme vertical migrations down the water column like their relative, the Bigeye thresher, and so just make do with the system just being found in their body. While being quite large sharks, and of course being somewhat intimidating because of this, they actually pose very little danger to people, as it's been found that they are quite shy and can therefore be difficult to approach in water. There has only been known in fact to have been one single provoked and non-fatal attack by them on a person, and only 4 attacks on boats, which are likely just incidents that came about from them being fished. When it comes to harm that is done, we cause far more harm to them than they do to us, with them being highly valued for their meat and fins, and they're often taken in large numbers by fisheries across their range. This is most evident with the setup of a large gillnet fishery for these sharks, which was developed in Southern California in 1977, which began with 10 vessels as an experiment to see how productive and profitable the fishery could be. Within just 2 years, the fleet had expanded to up to 40 vessels, and the fishery peaked in the early 80s, when up to 1,091 tons worth of the sharks were collected in the span of just 1 year in 1982, which was likely made up of around 200 through 270 sharks. This immense fishing pressure led to the common thresher population collapsing rapidly, and landings decreased to less than 300 tons a year by the late 80s, with larger individuals starting to vanish from the population and then reducing by over 50% overall. This was down to their slow reproduction and fecundity, meaning that even with high initial numbers, they could never have staved off such fishing pressures for that long of a time, and that consistently. Today they are still fished, though at far lower rates, and many fisheries have now shifted focus to the more valuable swordfish, though some common threshers are still caught as bycatch from time to time. Today, they are classified as vulnerable due to their fishing and also their low fecundity, with more regulations around their fishing having the effect of their population increasing, thankfully, with the California subpopulation recovering with an estimated growth rate of about 4 to 7% per year. Continuing on, Bigeye threshers are the most disparate in terms of the appearance of the 3 species, with them having quite a cool list of anatomical and behavioural features that makes them very interesting. Found worldwide, the most obvious traits and what also gives them their name are their huge eyes, which can be up to 20 centimeters in diameter, and as much as 9% of their length in juveniles, which gives them the distinction of having some of the largest eyes proportionally of all vertebrates. They are uniquely positioned as well, with their pupils facing in an upwards direction, which is due to their unusual keyhole-shaped sockets that allow them to be more easily rotated. This feature helps them in being better positioned to spot prey from above, which is important given that they are adapted to hunt in low light conditions. A pair of lateral grooves also extend from their eyes to over their gill slits, which gives them quite a helmet-like appearance. Interestingly, they are also one of the few shark species that undergo a diel vertical migration, which is where they stay in deep waters during the day and then moving to surface waters at night to feed. They can also be found at depths of up to an amazing 723 meters in depth, where temperatures can often get to a very chilly 5 degrees, and the water pressure is also very high. At around 3.5 meters long and weighing around 160 kilograms, they also come in as the second largest thresher species, and with their proportionally larger teeth than other threshers, they are able to feed on a wider variety of prey. They'll feed not just on the common schooling fish like herring and mackerel, but also larger benthic fish like hake, as well as squid and billfish. When they make the vertical migrations, they, unlike the common thresher mentioned earlier, do have rete mirabile around their brain and eyes, with this vasculature exchange system likely helping them in order to move up the water column from the great depths as temperature changes dramatically, often by 10 degrees or more. They do, however, lack this metabolic system in the rest of their body, meaning heat is more easily lost to the water otherwise. But this trade-off for their increased eye and brain protection must evidently have been worth it, for it is otherwise more metabolically expensive. Getting into the last, and also the most iconic species, pelagic threshers are the smallest of the 3, with them being about 3 meters in length and weighing around 69 kilograms in weight, also having quite the rocky scientific history. This was because of their close similarity to the common threshers, which was noted by ichthyologist Hiroshi Nomura in 1935 in a paper titled, quote, "On the 2 species of the thresher shark from Formosan waters," end quote. He describes Alopeus pelagicus, the species being talked about currently, based on 3 specimens, which range from 2.85 to 3.30 meters in length, one of which he himself illustrated. He described well their distinctive teeth, what with their unique lateral cusplets, which made it clear that they were a distinct species, though he also included a separate description of a fetus, which was also under the Pelagicus classification. The issue was that in a scientific slip-up, he did not designate type material, and nor did he indicate whether said fetus was either removed from one of the 3 previously brought up adult specimens, or if he obtained it elsewhere. It turns out that instead, the fetus is instead almost certainly that of a common thresher, with them having the characteristic comparatively smaller eyes, as well as the broader head, labial furrows, and their more pointed pectoral fins. Therefore, their initial description and illustrations may be based in some ways on the common thresher, which are quite some ambiguous beginnings in the classification of them. As mentioned earlier in the video with the common threshers, the main differences to note include the fact that pelagic threshers do not have their white underbelly coloration extending over the base of their pectoral fins, as well as their differing mouth and bodies, where common threshers are more compact and rounded. In pelagic threshers, they also have a distinctive pinch look to their heads when viewed from below, with their large eyes and small mouth having made quite a name for themselves in the way of being featured in many memes which depict them, being viewed as being both very cute and also somewhat shocked looking at all times. When looked at anatomically, it looks like they are unlikely to be as warm-blooded like their relatives, with them lacking the rito mirabile aside from around the head, which is just in the form of a rito system, which like the Bigeye thresher, but to a lesser extent, likely helps in protecting them from temperature changes. They are still however remarkably active, and have been seen to make massive jumps out of the water, which is a behaviour that they likely do to further split apart groups of fish so that they can better pick them off when they land back in the water. Their young are also born unusually large, with pups upon their birth being up to 43% the size of the mother, which is pretty crazy to think about. Unfortunately, outside of what I've mentioned here, they are otherwise pretty poorly known, which isn't helped by the fact that they are very shy, and therefore don't like the approach of divers, with the production of bubbles being the main culprit, and so to better approach them, divers have had to forego such equipment, so that they don't scare off these most awesome of sharks. Before getting into the most famous bit of anatomy, being their incredible tails, it is also worth mentioning that there are also larger extinct relatives of these sharks that used to exist, being A. pallitassi and A. grandis, which all lived in the Miocene epoch around 20 through 13 million years ago. These animals, estimated from the size of their teeth, have been estimated to have been comparable in size to, or even bigger than living great whites, with said teeth being up to or over 4 centimeters in length. Their similarity between each other has led to the suggestion that the two may well be synonymous with each other, but that is still yet to be conclusively proven. The thing with a lot of this information is that it is all surprisingly very recent, with the existence of A. pallitassi only coming about in 2018. 4 years prior to their description, a fossil dealer named Mark Pallitas, well known in the space, would donate a single tooth to paleoichthyologist David Ward to see if this would lead to a description of it. After deliberation and presentations, including at the esteemed Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, the existence of the species and genus would eventually be published in a paper just around 6 years ago as of this recording. While all we have to go on for these sharks is their teeth, they do hold some clues as to how they may have appeared and acted in life. The teeth being as broad as they are suggests a level of convergence with that of the otodontids, the group of so-called megatooth sharks, which includes the most famous member of Megalodon. This means that in terms of their diets, they were likely eating prey that were a good deal larger proportionally than what living threshers are used to, given that they mainly just eat small fish and soft-bodied cephalopods. Because of this, they may well have lacked the derived trait of the long tail lobe that their living relatives have, and may have instead more so resembled great whites. They both might also be a separate genus, being more so like offshoots than close relatives, sometimes being referred to as Trigonotodus, but that too needs some more looking into. Getting back into the living threshers, it's about time this late in the video to finally talk about their most iconic traits and what gives them their name, and that is their ridiculously long tails. Being as long as their total body length, they are a very captivating piece of anatomy, and for decades sparked numerous discussions and debates over just what their tails were used for and how they functioned. What they were used for and how they used them was only found out relatively recently, but before then there were a good amount of ideas and reports of them in action that helped to narrow things down, though none were fully scientifically conclusive. One of the craziest and now known to be inaccurate stories centres on their apparent partnership with swordfish in, get this, hunting whales. One of the most notable of these so-called accounts was in Purchas's Pilgrims, a collection of several volumes of reports from many countries that was compiled by the Anglican cleric Samuel Purchas, which was published in 1625. Apparently the sharks would circle unsuspecting whales using their whip-like tail fins to beat the ocean surface into a froth, which would apparently confuse their targets. When the whales were distracted, the swordfish would then swim below the whale and use their pointed snouts to pierce the distracted whales, which would apparently dispatch them rather effectively. Other similar accounts also seem to suggest that the swordfish would position themselves under the whale, while the thresher would apparently body slam into them from above, driving the whale into the swordfish's rostrum, which would also cut huge gashes in them with their tails. The big issue with this, of course, is that swordfish and thresher sharks as we know them don't have either the size or anatomy to predate on whales, with them instead occupying a different niche of eating fish and cephalopods. Thresher sharks do indeed jump very high, as we've discussed already, but they also certainly don't have the mass to do anything of much against a whale, so how on earth could this account even be a thing? Were the people who observed this just out of their minds? Well no, they were observing something, but it wasn't what they thought. What is likely the case is that orca, which are well known for targeting and feeding on whales, were instead the culprits, with their tall dorsal fins diving up and down through the water being mistaken for the tails of sharks, which if viewed at a sufficient enough distance could indeed be seen as being part of a shark. Regarding the swordfish, their rostra have indeed been found in some whale species, like the blue and fin whales, though this is almost certainly not in the case of an aggressive attack. When large shoals of fish are present, often attracted by the presence of krill, brings a whole bunch of large predators together, and as such, during such frenzies and given the speeds that they travel at, them impacting whales certainly would happen from time to time. This association of the orca's dorsal fins and the known fact of swordfish interactions with whales therefore seems to have been merged together in a way that made sense with those who saw this going on at the time, though of course we now know better through better observations and scientific methods. For other interpretations, reports of them using their tails to stun or attack prey popped up from time to time, though this hypothesis, even with many accounts, was often called out for being improbable, and that they weren't flexible or strong enough to actually be useful as any type of weapon. Instead, consensus was more along the lines of them using them to herd their prey so that they could then pick them off with their mouths more easily, though the sheer number of reports stating that they were using them to strike prey were too numerous to discredit or discount them all entirely. Circumstantial evidence, like 97% of all common threshers caught on pelagic longlines in the northwest Indian Ocean being hooked through their long tail fin, suggested that they were snagged as they were in the process of trying to stun hooked fish, alongside reports of them striking repeatedly at fish at the end of a pier near California. All continues to pile up throughout the years, so there was very clearly something going on. It wasn't until comparatively very recently in 2010 that this supposed behaviour was scientifically reported on and studied, and the results were very interesting. Dr. Tsuge Sepulveda and colleagues at the Fleger Institute of Environmental Research at Oceanside, California, and the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth all set out to film thresher sharks feeding in the wilds, and also to observe how they approach their prey. To do so, the researchers involved towed a video camera behind a research boat around the waters of Southern California, placing two baited lines out in front of it in the hopes of luring in some thresher sharks, which prefer dense schools of fish over other prey items.
Wow! Oh my god! Get him nice and close, get him nice and close.
Then, after doing this over 27 separate days, 650 minutes of footage was obtained, with 33 common threshers seem to have engaged with the bait in some way. And what was notable is that 14 of the 33 sharks attempted to strike at the bait fish with their tails, landing their mark with an impressive success rate of 65%. For the first time in their recorded scientific history, the debate on what they use their tails for was finally settled, and that they did indeed use them for predation. They were also noted to use them in two different ways, either charging towards the bait at a rapid pace and then coming to a stop with their wing-like pectoral fins to flick their tails overhead, something which makes them resemble scorpions when they do so, with them also positioning themselves alongside the bait before then flicking it sideways to attack their targets in a parallel position to them. The same year, another study, this time in the Philippines with pelagic threshers, was undertaken by Simon Oliver, who is the founder of the Thresher Shark Research and Conservation Project, being based at the University of Liverpool. Instead of seeing the sharks interacting under more controlled conditions, Simon and his team instead conducted more of an observational study, both watching and filming the sharks in action instead of artificially luring them in like the previously mentioned one. Seen hunting large schools of sardines, the footage was also just as spectacular as the previously mentioned study, also confirming that they really were hunting with their tails, and dynamically so too. From 61 observations made between June and October, the sharks were recorded as being able to flip their tails over their heads at a speed of, in some cases, up to 128 km per hour, which was much more aggressive and potent than was expected. Fish that were hit by such an attack were often either stunned or completely broken into multiple pieces, with the sharks then picking them off when they observed the results of their charge. While they were only successful with about a third of their strikes, with each one that connected, they were noted to have killed several in one go, which meant that this drawback of success was still ultimately energetically efficient. During 3 of the hunts that were filmed, bubbles were seen at the top of the shark's tail, which appears to be down to them moving so quickly that they cause the water to boil through dissolving gases, a phenomenon that occurs when the pressure in front of them in the water is lowered rapidly, with small bubbles being released from the movement and then collapsing after the water pressure equalizes. This process is known as cavitation, which is also seen in animals like mantis shrimp, which are very well known for their power at such small sizes. Other animals also hunt with their tails, with scorpions as mentioned earlier on land being the most well known, and orca and dolphins also being known to employ such strategies, but strategies like this, in the case of threshers, are entirely unique among sharks. With the behaviour being clearly observed and confirmed to be true, a massive question about their lives was finally solved, but yet, as is the case in science, more questions arose, in particular how they were doing this biomechanically. For those that researched this, it revealed a remarkable level of specialisation that left even those studying them in awe. In a collaboration between the Florida Atlantic University, NOAA and the Apex Predators program, the study used micro-CT scanning technology to examine their tails in a closer detail, collecting multiple variables of their vertebral anatomy, including but not limited to their height, width and length. What was found was that their microstructure and also their proportions varied dramatically among developmental groups, from embryonic through to adult individuals, with increasing age correlating with an increased mineralized structure of their tails as they matured, and that the structure of their tails was indeed a good deal more strengthened than their front end. In a way, the researchers pitched that this anatomical structure is one quite similar to catapults, where the thresher's body is the study beam, their tail being the flexible sling, and the lobe of the tail being the object that is lashed out. When they attack, therefore, when it comes to their overhead strikes, there are 4 main phases, being preparation, strike, wind down recovery, and prey collection. The sharks will charge forward in the preparation phase, with the lead up to the strike being initiated by the lowering of their snouts and the ventral flexion of their bodies. Their large balancing pectoral fins are then adducted, with their posterior body region then being raised dramatically that helps to bring them to a sudden stop. This then allows for their dorsal region to accelerate the upper lobe of their massive caudal fin, which then comes forwards, with its speed being accelerated by the sudden slowdown mentioned earlier. After a strike is initiated, the wind down phase then begins after the tail has been fully extended past the snout, which is then followed by the head and pectoral fins returning to their initial swimming posture. Prey collection then occurs, which is straightforwardly the sharks looking around the region in where they strike to pick off any potential prey items that may have either stunned or killed. All of this is why threshers are such amazing sharks, and yet, in spite of all their incredible specialisations and lovable appearance, they are struggling. They are routinely taken by commercial fisheries in the Central Pacific and Indian Oceans, often as bycatch but also intentionally. For example, them comprising over 12% of Taiwan's annual shark landings, which is an astonishing 3,100 fish caught every year, so the scale is really quite extraordinary. The squalene oil that is present in their livers, which comprises about 10% of their total weight, is also used in the manufacturing of cosmetics and some machine oils, with much of its supposed benefits not being medically supported as often happens to be the case. They are also at great risk from long-line fisheries, with them getting drawn into the high fish-dense regions and then getting their long tails hooked on the lines. This makes it easy for them to drown, since they can't get their gills ventilated properly since they aren't consistently swimming forward. Even when released, the amount of stress can also be enough to kill them, and the extended periods without sufficient respiration unfortunately drives this even more. The aim of researchers and environmental groups in this field has therefore been to advocate for the use of more traditional methods which rely more on capturing the fish by their mouths, which would at least then have the advantage of the sharks being able to breathe better before they are then ultimately released. Their low fecundity, as has been mentioned, also means that the sharks don't have high numbers of offspring over their lifetimes, and so populations that are fished as heavily as these sharks are just don't have the capacity to come back from such large-scale fishing practices. It's because of this and more that 2 of the thresher species, the Bigeye and common thresher, are vulnerable, and the pelagic thresher is endangered, with them still on the decline. And so, like the threshers which are caught on fishing lines which put up such a strong fight that they'll leap meters out of the water, we have to have the same level of passion to face the existential threats they're facing, because ultimately, what is best for them is also the best for us, and that's a livable and sustainable planet where everyone and everything is as secure as can be. All in all, I thank you for watching this video on these animals and that you may have learned something new. If you would like to see more from this channel, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, I'll see you for the next instalment of this year's Shark Week.